In this lesson, we'll take a look at how we can use polygons to build geometry rather than the NURBS that we've been using. So we've used curves and NURB surfaces to build this main fuselage, but now we want to build this sort of piece underneath, and we're going to use polygons to do this, which are going to be a little bit different. We'll start again with a primitive shape, which is basically just again a preset object shape. So we can go to create. This time we'll go to polygon primitives, and you can see we have a number of options here. We'll just go ahead and bring in a cube. So the cube is in here, and you can see it. We frame up on it. It's a little bit small. So again, we can go ahead and modify the cube by going into polycube under the inputs under the channel box. And you can see we can change the width, height, and depth. So I can select all of those and then middle drag those up until we get something that is a bit larger. And you can start to see that here. Now if you want to change any of these values independently, you can do that as well. So we can start to make this maybe a bit narrower. We can use our move tool to kind of move it around a little bit and change the depth value. You can see it stops at 100 when we dial it in, but we can always numerically kind of put that in. So let's go ahead and dial that up a little bit to maybe 140 or so. And then we'll kind of move it into position here. Okay, and we can also start to add some divisions to this. Let's make it a little bit narrower. So on the width, let's go ahead and take that width down just a little bit. Okay, now right now we don't have any divisions here. Okay, so what we have is basically just a box. And if we go into component mode, just as we did with the NURBS, we can go ahead and access our vertices or vertexes, and we can grab those, and those are just the points that make these up. So we can modify this, and you can see there's no curves involved. It's just basically a box with points, edges connecting those points, and then those edges make up polygons or faces, which are the visible parts of our object. Okay, this is a really basic but also very flexible type of geometry that we can use. Now we need to create more divisions because the amount of detail that we're able to add, just as with the NURBS, is really kind of capped at our resolution. Okay, if we don't have the resolution there, we don't have the points there, we can't change the shape. So really all we can do here is just move those around, but we're really not changing the shape too much. So we need to add resolution. So we can do that. One of the ways we can do that is to go ahead and just change our subdivisions. So we can go ahead and change our subdivisions here, and let's go ahead and change our subdivisions here, and then we can add some subdivisions along the depth. So maybe 2 by 2 by 3. So now we've got these subdivisions added. This will allow us to shape our mesh a little bit more. So we could grab all of those points at the top and move them down. So they're just inside the fuselage there. All right. Now I want to kind of make a little bit of a curved shape out of this. So I'm going to go ahead and take these points, move them down about halfway. Okay. And then I'll take these at the bottom, and let's go ahead and actually scale these in a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to deselect the ones in the middle and move those up. So what we end up with is a little bit of a kind of circular shape or a cylindrical shape. Okay, we can go ahead and bring this in a little bit too if we want to. But we end up with something like this. Okay, now we can also come in here and grab the points on the end, and we can rotate them. And I just want to rotate them along the X. Okay, and kind of move them out. And then we can kind of pull those down so they're nice and straight. Pull this up so it's nice and straight. So we get something like this. All right. Now I actually want this to be a bit shorter, and I want to extrude out a little bit, so I want it to actually come to right here. So I'm actually going to move this up a little bit. So let's move this up, and then we'll take these points and move them out. You can see where this is sort of not lined up anymore, so I'll just move that in. Now one of the great ways of working with polygons is to create sort of limbs or appendages or pieces that come off of other pieces. So to do that, we use something called extrude. Now extrude requires us to select the faces, so we'll go to component mode, go to faces, and now we can select individual faces. I'm just holding down shift to select those. Okay, so you can see if I just move those down, it's moving the actual faces, but we want to actually create new geometry. So we're going to go into, and you can see here we're still left with our NURBS, so we want to go back to our polygons menu set, go to Edit Mesh, and Extrude. Now we have the ability to change the thickness, okay, but I can just go ahead and pull this down here. You can see I can kind of dial that in here. We can change the offset and also the number of divisions, okay, or we can just move this up and down. So I'm going to go ahead and move it down to the bottom here, what we see, and then we can go ahead and jump back to our rotate and just kind of rotate it into position, okay, and then we can take these points and kind of flatten them out a little bit, okay. I'll make that planar, and so you can see we can add that extra geometry, and it's treated all of those faces as a single piece, so it's extruded those all together. All right, we can do the same thing up here if we want to create a little bit of a detail up here. So we'll take all 4 of these faces on the end. Let's go ahead and again do an extrude. This time we don't want to pull them off the surface yet, so we'll actually go to scale and scale them down so they're still planar with the faces that we selected, but we can then hit G to repeat that extrude, and we can change from an axis that's letting us pull it out along the normal to a world axis, which will allow us to pull it straight out along the Z, which we can now do. Now again, you can see that it's treating these 4 faces as an individual selection, but we can also extrude faces individually. So let's create this exact same selection, okay? Now let's go ahead and do one extrude and just scale it in a little bit. And then let's change one option. So we're going to go under Edit Mesh, and there's a little checkbox called Keep Faces Together. We'll uncheck that, and then we'll do the exact same extrude and see what happens. Now, if we go into Scale, you can see that we're actually scaling each one of those faces individually rather than all together. So this will allow us to create some interesting effects. Okay, so now if we do an extrude, and we don't really need this on here, but we can kind of pull those back, and we can create some little details in here. Okay, do another extrude, scale it in a little bit, and we can get something like that. One thing to keep in mind though is you really want to make sure that you know whether this is on or off, because you can really start to do some extruding, and you think you're dealing with it one way and it's actually doing something else, and you don't find that out until later. So you really want to keep your eye on this checkbox, whether it's on or off. Typically I'll keep it on and then turn it off if I need to, and make sure I turn that back on immediately after. Okay, and any of these faces that are up inside here, we don't need to see those, so we can always go back in, select those faces, and we can just hit delete to get rid of those polygons. And so you can see that working with polygons is a lot more straightforward than working with NURBS. You can actually select the geometry in a very easy to understand way, and you can actually delete it, move it around, things like that. All right. Now this polygon is very sharp right now, so one of the ways that we can deal with this is to create a smooth version, and we can either go up to Mesh and add a smooth, or we can use a Smooth Mesh Preview, which is simply hitting 3 on our keyboard. You can see this creates a preview of what this will look like in a smooth form, which allows us to see that there are some areas that look really good, like this, but there's some areas we want to be a bit sharper. To fix that, you need to actually add edge loops. So we'll hit 1 to go back to our faceted mode, or this is our base polygon. And so take a look at this area right in here, okay? What's happening is it's smoothing between this line and this line and this line, and they're so far apart that it creates this very soft transition here. So in order to make something sharper, you need to add edge loops. There are a number of ways to add edge loops, but let's go ahead and look at one of the simplest. So we'll go to Edit Mesh, Insert Edge Loop Tool. This will allow us to go ahead and click on an edge, and you can see that preview of where that loop is actually being added. So the closer you add it to this edge, the tighter that edge is going to be. So we'll go ahead and add an edge. It doesn't change the shape of the low polygon here, but when we smooth it, you'll see that now we get a much tighter edge right in here. Okay. Same thing down here. If you want this to be a bit sharper, go to Insert your Edge Loop tool, insert an edge loop down here, and then when we smooth it, you can see how this is now much tighter. Okay. If we want it to be a bit tighter up here. Go ahead and repeat that process. And you can see we can sort of start to tighten things up. Now I also want to come in and add a little bit of geometry coming out this way. So I'll go ahead and select these polygons up at the front, okay? And we'll go to the side to kind of see this. And we can now extrude those out. And I'll just select all of those polygons. Let's actually extrude those out. And we'll just move them forward. Okay. And then I want to select the polygons on the bottom. Or actually, I just want to add an edge loop right in there because I want to add a little bit of shape to it. So let's go ahead and use the Insert Edge Loop tool to add a bit of shape. Now, when we go to our edge selection, we can click on an edge loop and double click on it to select it. And unlike isoparms, we can actually move these. So I can take this and move it down, take this one and move it up, and it'll allow us to add a little bit of shape to this. And we can kind of come in here, select those points, move them down a little bit. Okay. And if we want that to be a little bit sharper, we need to add edge loops here for when we smooth this. I'm going to create a little bit of a kind of a division there. All right, so that's one way that we can deal with polygons and building this little shape down here at the bottom. The next thing that we want to look at is how we can add some pipes to this. So we can do this using NURBS and curves in a slightly different way that we looked at in the past. So we'll go ahead and do that in the next lesson.